be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of, What If Ichigo Enters Attack on Titan? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Disco Stew 09 on fanfiction.net. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. It was Judgment Day for Eren the next morning. The cadets lined up in multiple lines as they watched the cadets that failed the previous day have one more chance to prove themselves. Most of them had failed miserably, some of them showed improvement but it wasn't enough to pass and others managed to succeed. It wasn't long until it was finally Eren's turn. "Erenyeager, are you ready?" The instructor stood in front of Eren. The young cadet was strapped up to the mechanism. Control of the 3DMG is the bare minimum requirement to be a soldier. If you can't do that, then it is back to the settlement. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Eren shouted firmly. Begin. Keith Shoddy's ordered. The cadet standing next to the handle was Thomas and he immediately began turning the handle which slowly lifted Eren into the air. To everyone's surprise, especially Mikasa and Ichigo's, Eren managed to keep upright once he was off the ground. Mikasa immediately turned towards Ichigo with a glare, believing that he had told Eren about the faulty equipment but she froze when he saw the shock on Ichigo's face. The previous night, Ichigo was able to see through her but she could also see through him and she knew that he wasn't faking. The surprise on their faces disappeared when Eren suddenly lost his balance and slammed into the ground. "Get him down," the instructor ordered. "No, not yet." Eren called out desperately, "I can still." "Bring him down now." Keith demanded and Thomas followed the order and he lowered Eren to the ground. Eren climbed to his knees in despair and he stared out at nothing in particular as the realization that he would never achieve his goals became a reality. "Wagner." Keith barked immediately. "Yes, sir." Thomas saluted straight away. "Trade belts with Jaeger," the instructor ordered him. Ichigo glanced at Mikasa and while she didn't lose the emotionless look on her face as she observed the scene but Ichigo managed to catch the flicker of frustration that flashed in her eyes. He could understand why. Now she would have a tougher time protecting one that wouldn't hesitate to rush into danger. With a new belt on, one that wasn't damaged, Eren was surprised to discover how much easier it was to balance in the air. "I don't understand." Eren muttered out loud. "Defective equipment," Keith grunted holding the broken belt in his hands. "The metal fitting in the belt that you were using was broken. Normally, you're suspended from the waist, so even if you flip over, you shouldn't be able to hit your head on the ground. I have never heard of these things breaking before but you'll need to have a little maintenance done on your equipment." "Then my aptitude score?" Eren asked him hopefully. "No problem, keep practicing, Cadet Jaeger," the instructor informed him. Eren threw his arms up into the air with a victorious roar. He looked down triumphantly at Mikasa, internally thinking, "I did it. How about that Mikasa, Ichigo? I can do it. I can fight the Titans. You will never have to take care of me again, Mikasa." "It looks like he is getting it." Reiner shouted his approval next to Armin. "His eyes are saying, 'What do you think of this?'" Armin called out. "Wrong," Mikasa informed them, "he's relieved, because now he won't have to be separated from me." Ichigo didn't respond but he felt that Mikasa had misjudged what Eren was thinking. It was a secret to Mikasa but it wasn't one to Ichigo and Armin as they knew about the inferiority complex that Eren had towards Mikasa. Ichigo thought that Eren would be more delighted by the fact that he could train and become strong enough to fight the Titans on his own. He doesn't seem to excel, especially, and yet, for a few moments there, he maintained his balance with this broken equipment. Could anyone else have done that? Keith thought curiously and two people came to mind and they were Levi and Kyan. The thought of Kyan made him look over at Ichigo Kurosaki. The boy didn't seem to have the same natural talent as his uncle did, which was disappointing. He looked back over at Eren. Grisha, today, your son, became a soldier. The cadets that passed the aptitude test were all given the rest of the day off, but the instructor warned them to use it wisely as their brutal training would commence early tomorrow. Ichigo decided to stay away from the entire ruckus, preferring to find a quiet place to relax as he began to develop a splitting headache. It didn't take him long to find a large isolated tree near the outskirts of the training facility, and he climbed onto a branch and he rested against the trunk. He had no idea where this headache came from, but it was a painful one. Ichigo had never had one this painful before, and soon sweat began descending his forehead rapidly and he blacked out. Can you finally hear me, Kingy? Ichigo's eyes snapped open and he looked around wildly. He was surprised to find that he was still sitting on the branch of the tree, and he noticed that the sun was setting. He must have been out of it for a few hours, and for a brief moment he seriously had to wonder just how he didn't fall off. Keeping your body still was easy, that's how. A voice suddenly said to him. Ichigo's eyes widened and he looked around to see where the voice had come from, but he could see anyone in sight or at least close enough to call out to him. That's because I'm not outside, King. I am talking you from within. You must be joking. Ichigo thought back incredulously, that isn't possible. I'm afraid that it is, the voice snickered. I can't believe how pathetic you sound right now. I have gone insane. Ichigo groaned miserably. I should have known that this would happen. You are so ignorant, Ichigo. Weak and ignorant, but you're not insane. The voice informed him, I've been trying to communicate with for a long time now, King. I finally was able to break down the subconscious barrier that you created to keep me out. When I slammed on the wall and began forming cracks, that created the headache. When I finally broke through, it caused you blacked out. Ichigo couldn't believe that he was having a conversation with another voice in his mind. How can I possibly have another voice in my head? Ichigo demanded to know. I've never heard of somebody having a separate voice in their head. You know this how? The voice drawled. I read plenty of my father's medical books when I was younger. I have never heard of anything like this, or at least anyone that was sane having this problem. That must mean that I am insane. Ichigo decided. Don't make me repeat myself, Ichigo. The voice was obviously annoyed now. You are not insane. You just aren't a normal human. What am I then? Ichigo wanted to know. You're not ready to know, came the blunt reply from the voice in his head. All you need to know is that you're someone that has the ability to turn the tide in this battle against the Titans. You can't be serious. Ichigo retorted, I'm nothing special. The voice snorted. Incredulously, tell that to those men that were killed by you a few years back, or that Titan that you killed. I didn't do anything against that Titan. Ichigo snapped at it furiously. I blacked out just like I did against those men. You're right. The voice agreed. Technically I was the one that killed the Titan and those men. You did? Ichigo's eyes widened at the revelation. How? I thought you just said you only broke through just now. I guess you could say that in those times of peril, you were so desperate to survive and win, that you subconsciously opened a door that allowed me to take over briefly. The voice explained to him, your body was too young and weak, so I wasn't able to be in control for very long. That clears that up, thanks. Ichigo thought gratefully, fully aware that if it wasn't for this mysterious being in his head, he, his sisters and Mikasa wouldn't be here right now. At least you have manners. The voice brushed off his gratefulness. So, do you have a name? Ichigo asked it curiously. Of course I do, the voice retorted indignantly, my name is. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Ichigo apologized. I'm not surprised, the voice drawled indifferently, my name will unlock your power, but like I said, you're too weak. Ichigo couldn't deny that he was curious about his so-called power. Okay, then I train my butt off at the military academy so I can get this power. You do that, but you need to know, it's not just physical strength you need in order to wield this power, Ichigo. The voice informed him. What do you mean? Ichigo inquired curiously. Don't worry about that just now. You should be more worried about the fact that if you hang around here, you're going to miss dinner. The voice reminded him. I'll leave you alone for a while. That's a good point. Ichigo agreed, just realizing how hungry he was, and he climbed down the tree. Once he reached the bottom and he had began walking towards the dinner hall, he couldn't help but ask, what should I call you until I learn your real name? Just call me Shirasaki. Why do you want to be called Shirasaki? Ichigo asked curiously. Kuro means black, so I will use the opposite, which is Shiro, as it means white. Shirasaki informed him. Plus when you learn my name, the reason will become clearer. If you say so. Ichigo conceded. He still had so many questions about what the hell Shirasaki was and what was so special about him, but he knew that he wouldn't get the answers until he became strong enough. However, there was one obvious thing that he knew, and that was that it wouldn't be prudent for him to tell anyone about this. He wouldn't even tell Mikasa, Armin, Eren, and his sisters. Unbeknownst to the orange-haired cadet, a silent figure walked out from behind the tree with a smirk planted on his face. It was just like he had thought. Ichigo was similar to me, Denryu Ishida acknowledged. This was going to be interesting. It had been a brutal 3 years for the 104th Trainees Squad. The military training had been far tougher and more dangerous than any had anticipated. Many cadets had pulled out when it got too tough and had been sent to the fields to gather crops and other materials. Some had even been crippled and others had been killed, but the strongest managed to tough it out, or at least some of the weaker cadets had help in surviving. Forest Trail. Ichigo grunted softly when his foot collided with a rock buried deep within the mud, causing him to stumble slightly. The rain had been falling since early morning and it continued to fall just as heavy, closing in on the lunch break. The orange-haired cadet, along with a small group of other cadets, was being forced to run in the rain and the mud, carrying heavy backpacks on their backs. They had been running for over an hour along a path in a forest. The training had several purposes. They were running to increase their endurance and to test their willpower in case any of them get trapped outside of the walls and must learn how to survive in Titan Wilderness. Ichigo was currently in the middle of the pack, but when he glanced back he saw that Armin was beginning to fall behind. What's wrong, Arlert? Keith Shotties barked from the top of his horse. He had some nerve riding a horse while they ran, Ichigo thought, annoyed. You're the only one behind. Is it too heavy for you? Would you like to be the only one not carrying a pack? DMN. Armin panted tiredly as Keith's horse began trotting ahead. Ichigo slowed down until Armin caught up with him. Give me that, Armin. Ichigo grabbed Armin's backpack and he chucked it over his left shoulder. What are doing? Armin panted, you're going to fail if you help me. Fail for what? Ichigo scoffed, for helping my comrade. I don't care. At the very least, you will lose marks and it might prevent you from making the top 10. Despite being exhausted, Armin was still able to think ahead like that. I don't need to finish in the top 10 to get into the Scouting Legion. Ichigo pointed out, I'm just a grunt, cannon fodder. The orange-haired cadet reminded him, and he ignored the scoff in his head from Shirasaki. Ichigo was determined to play down any thought of being important. You might not have the physical abilities to be a good soldier, Armin, but you have something far more important. Armin didn't know how to reply to that, not understanding what he had that Ichigo deemed important. He didn't have to think on this for long. You two are falling behind. Reiner had slowed down to join them, at this rate you will both fail. Ichigo wasn't interested in retorting how he didn't care about failing again, so he didn't bother answering and he focused on the task at hand. He was surprised though when Armin's backpack was stripped from him by his determined friend, and Ichigo was quite astonished when Armin ran ahead. Reiner Braun, Keith Shoddy's thought looking back at the oldest of the trio, he is a strong soldier, both physically and mentally, and he is trusted by his comrades. Armin Arlert, he glanced at the smaller boy, while lacking in physical strength, he's demonstrated an extraordinary aptitude for his studies. Finally he glanced at the last cadet of the trio, Ichigo Kurosaki, Isshin's son. He is proficient with the 3DMG, but he excels at hand-to-hand combat and is a natural with a sword in hand. Forest, 3DMG course. After the group finished their exhausting run and had lunch, it was time for 3DMG training. Fortunately for the group, the rain had stopped during lunch and the sun had come out. They all had training with 3DMG in all types of conditions, from mist, to rain, to hail, and to snow. They had even learned how to wield 3DMG during the night, despite that the Titans wouldn't attack at night. Keith Shoddy's continued to observe the cadets during the exercise, coming closer to determining just who would make up the top 10. Annie Leonhardt, the instructor, observed the blonde-haired girl slice through a fake Titan's nape with ease. Her strike form is flawless, but she works poorly with others and tends to isolate herself. Bertolt Hoover, the young adult, followed Annie, slashing a deep cut into the middle of the target. He has great potential, but lacks initiative. Finally a third person slashed the target, but his cut was much shallower than both Annie's and Bertolt's. Gene Kirstein, MSTR of 3D Maneuver Gear, his brash personality causes friction with the team. The next target that Gene tried to slay didn't work out as well as he was outmaneuvered suddenly by Connie and Sasha. The girl with the large appetite managed to get the first slash into the fake Titan. Sasha Blouse, she has unconventional, good instincts, but they make her unsuited for teamwork. Keith glanced at the shaved-head cadet, Connie Springer. He demonstrates superior physical agility, but lacks mental acuity. Last, but certainly not least, Keith observed the other three cadets that stood a chance of making it into the top 3, while one was guaranteed to make it. He watched with a tiny bit of awe as the black-haired teen girl sliced through multiple fake Titans with ease. Mikasa Ackerman, a MSTR of all subjects, and she is widely considered one of the best in our history. Keith thought with a large amount of pride. He could easily see her reaching the potential of the captain of the Scouting Legion, Levi. A brown-haired boy followed up with slashes on the fake Titan's napes, but they weren't as deep as Mikasa's. Erenyeager, he has no outstanding talents, but he's worked harder than anyone to improve his marks. And he is more motivated to attain his goal than anyone. The last person that Keith observed was the mysterious Denryu Ishida. Keith observed the young man fly through the air and he slashed through the nape of a fake Titan as if it was butter. The boy's skill with the 3DMG was tense and restrictive, however Keith had seen enough subtle signs to suggest that the boy was holding back. However, he couldn't prove this. The boy's surname, Ishida, was a familiar one, but Keith couldn't quite place where it sounded familiar. Denryu Ishida, he is an amateur with the 3DMG, but he may be deliberately holding back for some reason. He also shows disinterest in all training aspects, except whenever there is a competition where he has to compete against Ichigo Kurosaki. Keith knew that if they were training for a war against other humans, then Ichigo Kurosaki and Denryu Ishida would be the first two soldiers he would select. Unfortunately, they weren't. If Denryu didn't show more aptitude using the 3DMG, then he had no chance of making the top 10, even if the rest of the course he was masterful in. Training grounds. Ichigo effortlessly sidestepped the stab that Armin tried to hit him with a wooden knife, and with a quick chop to Armin's wrist, the blonde-haired boy dropped the knife painfully, and Ichigo quickly grasped his wrist and twisted it behind Armin's back. "Okay, I give," Armin yelled out urgently. Ichigo immediately let go of his arm and Armin rubbed it gently, trying to ease the pain. "You give up too easy, Armin." Ichigo lectured him, "At least try to break out with your other arm, or throw your head back to try and headbutt me. Not all of us have a strong pain tolerance like you, Ichigo." Armin reminded him. He could still remember back when they were kids and the times that it was only Ichigo around to protect him. The orange-haired boy kept on fighting, no matter how many times he was hit. It was a will that Armin envied, wishing that he could do it as well. Ichigo didn't reply, and instead, Armin noticed a smirk appear on his face, and he looked in the direction that his orange-haired friend was looking. Annie had just threw Reiner to the ground like he was nothing, and then she proceeded to throw Eren around. Her skill never ceases to impress me. Ichigo acknowledged. Can she beat you now? Armin asked him curiously. He could still remember the first time that Ichigo and Annie had sparred, and despite Annie's incredible talent, Ichigo proved to be the superior fighter. Not even Mikasa could take Ichigo down back then. Like Armin had just said, no matter how many times he was hit, Ichigo always found a way to keep fighting. She has improved a lot over the last 3 years. Ichigo answered him, though she has to rely more on grappling to beat me, she can't beat me in a fist-to-fist fight. What about Mikasa? Armin inquired as they watched Annie walk away from a bruised Eren, and Mikasa hurried over to her adopted brother. Can she beat you in a straight fist fight now? We're pretty even in terms of skill, but I'm a bit faster, and so I can dodge her blows easy than she can dodge mine. Ichigo admitted with a fond smile, you really don't want to be hit by Mikasa, she is freakishly strong. Armin noticed the fond smile on Ichigo's face, and it increased his confusion about Ichigo and Mikasa's relationship. Something happened back in 749 when they had all traveled to the Trost district. He had been busy with trying to help Jean win a cooking contest against Sasha. Annie had helped them. During that time, something had happened between Ichigo and Mikasa. Over the years since they had joined the military, Mikasa and Ichigo were closer than anyone. Mikasa was even closer to Ichigo than she was to Eren. However, when they returned to the military academy, they started to spend more time apart. Mikasa spent more time with Eren, him and some of the other female cadets, and Ichigo spent more time on his own or training with Denryu Ishida. It had been an awkward time for them all. The separation was noticeable to pretty much everyone. Eren and Armin had asked them both what had happened, but they both replied the same way, there are some things that we both have to work out, and the best way to do that is to get some distance from each other for a little while. After a month, things changed again. Whatever they needed to work out, it seemed that they had made some progress because the two of them started hanging around each other again. They didn't spend as much time with each other as they used to, but in a way, they seemed even closer than they had been previously. Kurosaki, a voice cut through Armin's thoughts, and he turned to see Ishida approaching them, up for a spar. It's been a long time since we have fought. Ichigo smirked, readying his fist. Roughly a year, and this time you are not going to win. Ishida stated cockily, falling into his own stance. The two of them had developed quite the competitive rivalry over the last 3 years. Each time a competition came up, they were always on opposite sides. Each had their advantages over the other. If swords were put in their hands, Ichigo was clearly the superior user, but put a bow in their hands, and the dial swung in Ishida's favor. The whole training ground had grown silent, Armin noticed, and he glanced around to see everyone looking in this direction. Most had actually walked over to get a closer view, and the blonde-haired boy noticed that among the group were Mikasa, Eren, and Annie. Even the instructor, Keith Shotties, was observing this confrontation. Armin couldn't blame them all from wanting to witness these two go at it. From day one, Ichigo and Ishida were the two best martial arts fighters among the 104th squad. The two had such different fighting styles as well. Ichigo used traditional closed fists to punch his opponents, relying on the brute force of his blows to take them down. Ishida, on the other hand, used open-handed strikes, relying more on the precise nature of his blows to take down his opposition rather than with brute force. The first time they had fought, Ishida had defeated Ichigo convincingly. The orange-haired teen had no idea on how to combat the style that Ishida had used, since it was the first time Ichigo had ever fought against it. Ichigo learned how to fight it though, as the next time they had fought in 749, Ichigo came out on top. Who do you think will win this time? Reiner wondered out loud with his arms folded across his chest, a frown on his face. It's too hard to tell. Jean sighed, ruffling his hair. I'd imagine it will come down to whoever wants it more. If that is the case, then there is no way Ichigo is going to lose. Eren boasted confidently, it's almost impossible to keep him down when he is fully determined. Eren admired that ability of Ichigo and he often tried to replicate it. I don't know, Marco disagreed lightly. Ishida knows the best areas to strike in order to take someone down. Determination can only take you so far. Ichigo will win. Mikasa firmly stated, shutting everyone up. No one would disagree with Mikasa on this matter, all but one. No, Ishida has got Ichigo covered this time. Annie disagreed, her eyes firmly on Ichigo. It was a rare sight, Armin realized as he looked at Annie's eyes. He had never seen her look so interested in something like the way she was looking at Ichigo right now. Eren had seen genuine emotion from Annie and he told him that Annie has a passion for her martial arts. Armin believed that her passion extended beyond her own martial arts to the actual art in general. What makes you say that? Connie asked her in confusion. Ishida lost last time. Annie reminded them, like Ichigo did the last time. Ishida will have learned a way to counter his style of fighting. What makes you think that Ichigo hasn't learned some new moves or changed his style drastically? Eren asked her. He wasn't as strong as Ichigo or Denryu in one particular style of martial arts, but he was very proficient in using multiple different styles. He had learned from Mikasa, Ichigo, Annie and Reiner over the last 3 years. It was because of his multiple different fighting styles that enabled him to be number one in the class at martial arts. Annie just gave him a dull look. Do winners change their style? Or do they stick to the style that enabled them to win? Those that lose and survive have the chance to learn from it, but those that win get swept up in the victory and don't change. Annie and Mikasa, in the end, were both wrong. There was no victor and instead the two cadets ended up beating each other into exhaustion. Annie let out a slight snort when they both fell to the ground. It looks like Ishida didn't improve as much as I thought he would. With that, Annie walked away. Considering that everyone had stopped to watch that fight meant that this training exercise was clearly over for the day. Mikasa and Eren hurried over to help Ichigo up while Reiner and Bertolt helped Ishida. Despite their objections, the 4 of them carried the 2 cadets to sick bay to get their wounds treated. Graduation night a few months later. All of the cadets that remained in the 104th Squad were all gathered at the front of the military base, in rows the same that they were in on their first day at the academy. The teachers that the cadets had learned under all stood in a line before them, and standing in the middle between them and the top 10 cadets was the head of the military academy. He had even higher authority than Keith Shotty's. We have paid the price for 100 years of peace with tragedy. Given the sense of crisis at the time, we were ill-prepared to cope with the sudden appearance of the Colossus Titan. As a result, we have been forced to abandon our outer wall, Maria. Humanity's sphere of influence has been driven back to where we are now, wall rose. The head of the academy yelled out to all of the graduating cadets. Shirasaki snorted after hearing that, ill-prepared. That's a convenient way of putting it. More like too arrogant and lazy to come up with a contingency plan in the event that the Titans break through. There's no disagreement here. Ichigo agreed with his inner self. It wouldn't be a surprise for the Colossus Titan to show up to destroy this wall right at this moment. The academy head continued, whenever that time does come, your duty will be to relieve the producers and give your lives to stand against the Titan menace. Dedicate your hearts. Yes, sir, the 104th Training Squad all shouted together and they all saluted. Today, you have all completed your military training. The academy head continued, I will now announce the 10 among you who have obtained the top training results. Come forward if I call your name. At the head of the class, is Mikasa Ackerman. Mikasa didn't react to the announcement. It didn't matter to her where she finished, as long as she was strong enough to protect Eren like she had promised Carla. Second, Reiner Braun. Reiner released a proud smirk. At number 3, is Bertolt Hoover. Bertolt kept his head high, a frown on his face. Number 4, is Annie Leonhardt. The indifferent look on Annie's face didn't change. Number 5, is erenyeager. Eren clenched his fists tightly, a determined look appeared on his face. It was finally time for him to wipe out all of the Titans. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Number 6, is Jean Kirstein. Jean frowned, he didn't understand how Eren had beaten him, but he pushed the annoying thought away. He had achieved what he came to do. Now he would get the easy-like inside of the interior. Number 7, is Ichigo Kurosaki. Your crappy skills with the 3DMG compared to the 6 named before you kept you from scoring higher. Shirasaki informed him. Yeah, I know. Ichigo answered, I would have spent more time training with it, but you were the one that said it was pointless and had me do more running, push-ups and other things like that. For good reason, Shirasaki bluntly retorted. If Ichigo knew what Shirasaki looked like, he was certain that there would be a cocky smirk currently on his face. Once you unlock your powers, you will realize that the 3DMG is quite restrictive. I did every training exercise you asked over the last 3 years and yet I still don't know your real name. Ichigo pointed out, feeling frustrated. I've told you before, Ichigo, that it is more than physical strength required to hear my name. Shirasaki reminded him, I've helped you enough as it is, it's up to you to discover what you're missing in order to learn my name. Number 8, is Marco Bot. Marco was delighted to hear his name called out. That meant that he could join the military police and work under the king. Number 9, is Connie Springer. Like Marco, Connie was delighted by the announcement. Now the people in his village would have to respect him. And number 10 is Sasha Blouse. Sasha smiled happily when her name was called. When the 10 students all stepped forward, Ichigo at the corner of his eye looked over at Ishida, wondering if he was disappointed in not making the top 10. He wasn't expecting his rival to be looking pleased. You are the top 10, the head of the academy announced. Now that you have all completed your training, there are choices that have to be made. For those that finished in the top 10, you have 3 choices while the rest of you have only 2 choices. The garrison, which reinforces the walls, thereby protecting all of the towns. The scouting legion, prepared to sacrifice their lives by defying the Titans in their own domain. The military police, which exercises control over the king's subjects and maintains order. Of course, out of you raw recruits, the only ones that can join the military police are the 10 with the highest scores. Soon, I will be asking you what branch you want to be assigned to. But as of right now, the 104th Training Squad is officially disbanded. Dismissed. Yes, sir, the group of cadets shouted together. Cafeteria. Many of the disbanded 104th Training Squad had gone separate ways for the night. Some returned to their cabins to get a good rest, others headed out into the Trost district and others headed to the cafeteria to celebrate. Lucky BSTRD, a drunken cadet yelled at Jean, jealously, making the top 10. I'm sure you're going to join the military police, right? Huh. Jean drawled, that goes without saying. Why the hell else would I have aimed to join the top 10? I'm going to join the MP, too. Marco said from his seat next to Jean, it would be such an honor, to work near the king. Jean rejected Marco's reason immediately. Don't be such a goody-goody, Marco. Tell me how you really feel. You can't wait to get into the interior, right? We can finally escape this shitty, suffocating frontline town. A safe, comfortable life is waiting for us in the interior, right? Marco tried to deny it, but Jean wasn't having it and he simply brushed away Marco's objections. Jean turned to Annie and Bertolt, who were sitting across the table. Bertolt was sipping his beer and Annie was sitting on her bench, not even facing him. What about you guys? I'm joining the military police. Bertolt admitted. Me too, Annie sighed uninterestedly, giving Jean a bored glance. but I don't want anyone thinking that I am like you. You said that the interior was safe. Eren spoke up, silencing everybody in the cafeteria. Everyone knew that Eren and Jean arguments were legendary. Eren took a sip of his own beer. Once someone has officially become a soldier, drinking alcohol was perfectly legal. 5 years ago, this town was considered part of the interior. Jean, you don't have to go into the interior. I mean, isn't the interior of your brain soft enough for you? Reiner spat out his beer in laughter, accidentally soaking Armin. Many of the soldiers in the cafeteria chuckled at the jab. Ichigo, who was standing against the wall with his arms folded across his chest, sighed as Eren and Jean descended into another argument, and he glanced over at Mikasa, noticing that she also looked annoyed at Eren getting into another argument with Jean. Eventually the argument accelerated into a fist fight and Mikasa was forced to pick up Eren and carry him outside in order to break up the fight. However, Jean unleashed one last parting shot at Eren and Ichigo could see that it troubled his friend deeply. I bet you're planning to drag her into the Scouting Legion just the same way. Ichigo decided to follow Mikasa and Eren out. It seemed that it was time for them to make Eren accept that they all planned to join the Scouting Legion. He let Armin go out first, but before he could leave, Jean shouted out to him. I take it you're joining the Scouting Legion with him, Ichigo? Ichigo looked back over at Jean to see him, along with Reiner, Bertolt, Annie, Connie, Marco and Sasha staring at him intently, waiting for his answer. To be honest, Jean, I'm on your side about our chances against the Titans. Ichigo shocked them all by agreeing with Jean. Eventually Wall Rose will fall and my little sisters will be evacuated to Wall Sina. We don't have a chance of winning, but I'm still going to go out there and fight. I'd rather go out there and die than wait for the Titans to break through Wall Sina and devour my little sisters. Answer me this. Jean. What are you going to do when you're in the interior? Find a girl, marry her, and maybe have a kid, and for what? Just to see them devoured by a Titan when Wall Sina eventually falls. I don't know about all of you, but that sounds worse than death. With that, Ichigo left the completely silent cafeteria. Unknown to Ichigo, Shirasaki was seething internally. This is why you can't hear my name, you pathetic loser. Shirasaki snarled internally, his fists clenched tight enough that it caused BLD, that shitty resolve of yours. When the time comes, Ichigo, if your resolve remains this way, I swear I will devour you. I will take control and I will protect them all. Akira, Tsukiko, Eren, Armin, Annie and especially Mikasa, I will protect them, no matter what. When Ichigo exited the cafeteria, he saw Mikasa, Eren and Armin sitting on the steps just a few feet away from him. Ichigo, Eren greeted him. Mikasa told me that you're joining the Scouting Legion, as well. Pretty much, Ichigo shrugged, and he sat down next to Mikasa. I can't be bothered explaining why, and so before you get it in your head, I'm not joining because of you. This is my choice and mine alone. Eren nodded. While he fully intended on joining the Scouting Legion on his own, he couldn't deny the small bit of happiness that rose within after hearing that his friends were coming with him. He perked up along with the others when they Hannes walked by with 2 other soldiers. Hannes also noticed them and he dismissed them for the night. The 4 new soldiers stood up and saluted him as he approached them. At ease, Hannes said awkwardly when he joined them, DSPLN is important, but when it comes to you guys, I just can't get used to it. Hannes sighed, before smiling at them, it's been a while, huh? I can't get used to it either, Eren grinned playfully, a drunkard like you, now a squad leader in the garrison. Ichigo let out an amused smirk. You rugrats have gotten bigger, haven't you? Hannes asked, I shouldn't be surprised, it has been 5 years since you came to this town. He suddenly looked away, a somber look appearing on his face. I'm sorry. I couldn't save your mother, Eren. I'm sorry about your uncle, Ichigo. The orange-haired soldier tensed at the mention of his uncle and he bluntly replied, don't worry about it. There was nothing that you could do. Mikasa narrowed her eyes at Ichigo in concern. Apart from that night many years ago, when they slept under the same blanket, Ichigo had never opened up about Kaien. Enough about that now. Eren told him firmly, I'm older now and I have matured. I know that you didn't have a choice. Even if you had killed that titan, another would have appeared before long. Back when you were all just little brats, my family came down with the terrible disease that killed so much of our town. Hannes explained, the same disease that took your father's life, Ichigo. But one day, Dr. Jaeger appeared with the antibody for it and it saved their lives. I wanted to pay that debt back to your family but now I will never get the chance. How many times do I have to hear this? Eren asked annoyed. Hannes ignored him, I still don't have the faintest idea where your father, Dr. Jaeger, is. The only thing to go on is your memory, since you were the last one to see him, do you remember anything? Ichigo frowned when Eren's eyes widened before he clasped his forehead tightly. Ichigo grew very concerned when Eren suddenly collapsed onto his knees, Mikasa quickly grabbing him in an attempt to support him, calling his name worriedly. In only a matter of seconds, Eren collapsed into Mikasa's arms unconscious. No doubt he was trying to remember what happened back then. For his sake, I hope that he doesn't remember. Shirasaki informed Ichigo. Remember what? Ichigo demanded to know. Ah, that's right. Shirasaki realized, you don't remember either, but I suppose you have grown enough for me to give you a little bit of knowledge. Get on with it. Ichigo shouted impatiently. What is it that I don't remember? I never told you this, but it wasn't just those 2 times that I took control over you. There was a 3rd time as well. Shirasaki admitted, I took over so I could block out the memories of what happened. The day that you awaken your powers, you will automatically gain your memories of what happened that day. Can't you just give me a heads up? Ichigo asked him, determinedly. Absolutely not. Shirasaki snapped at him, if you get any important kind of detail of what happened, then I will not be able to suppress it. Trust me, you don't want to know and you better pray that Eren never remembers because it will destroy him. That sounded chillingly, Ichigo thought, but he couldn't help ask nervously, is Dr. Jaeger dead? Shirasaki wouldn't answer him. It was the morning after the graduation ceremony, and the sun was shining brightly, showering the town with another appealing day. Although for several cadets that were waking up, they didn't appreciate the bright light of the sun because of their pounding headaches. They had drunk far too much last night and they were regretting it immediately. Some cadets were even shocked to discover that they weren't alone in their beds after having drunken section. One person that didn't have either of those problems was Ichigo Kurosaki. The orange-haired cadet had managed to get a good sleep in the house that his sisters had been living in with the woman that Kaien had been dating when he was alive. Ichigo was glad that his sisters had been staying in a place like this since it was located behind Wall Rose and when the Titans attacked, his sisters would have plenty of time to retreat to Wall Sina. Here you go, Ichigo. Akira said happily, handing her beloved big brother a plate with 2 pieces of toast. Thanks, Akira. Ichigo replied gratefully, taking his seat at the kitchen table. After taking a few bites of his toast, the orange-haired soldier looked up and he grinned at the sight of Tsukiko entering the room in her pajamas and her out-of-control bed hair. Her hair had gotten longer over the last few years and he could barely see her face due to how out of control it was. He thought that Denryu's had been the worst he had seen, but that opinion was immediately changed. You look lovely today, Kiko. Ichigo greeted her. Shut up, Tsukiko mumbled tiredly, rubbing her eyes. What's for breakfast? Toast. Akira answered her cheerfully, immediately handing her sister her own plate of toast. Tsukiko mumbled something about having toast yesterday, but she didn't hesitate to dig into her breakfast. You haven't told us yet, Ichigo. Akira took her seat at the table, devouring her own breakfast. But what military force are you joining? Ichigo froze mid-bite. He had dreaded this moment for a couple of years now because he was afraid at how his sisters would react. He quickly shook his head and he prepared himself for their reactions. While he knew that this was going to be a tough talk, he knew that he could handle it. The tough talk that he and Mikasa had to have back in 749 after their spar turned into something more was much more uncomfortable than this. "I'm joining the Scouting Legion." Ichigo answered her honestly. Tsukiko choked on her food for a moment before looking at him with wide eyes. Ichigo was confident that Tsukiko would understand his reasons and accept his decision with few tears. Akira, on the other hand, won't take the news so calmly, and so he wasn't surprised when he saw her eyes widen in horror. "Why?" Tsukiko narrowed her eyes at him, suddenly fully alert. It was hard for Ichigo to take her seriously though, with how messed up her hair was. "You can't," yelled Akira, with tears in her eyes, interrupting Ichigo's chance to explain. "I've seen them all leave over the last couple of years and so many don't come back. I don't want you to go out there." Ichigo closed his eyes for a moment and he took a deep breath as he prepared to explain. "I know what the odds is, Akira," he said gently, "but this is something that I have to do. All of Eren's ranting may get annoying, but he is right. If by the off chance that I can help eradicating the Titans, no matter how small my contribution may be, then it will be worth it as you both won't have to live in fear." Tsukiko sighed and looked down at her leftover toast. A small smile appeared on her face. It was just like Ichigo to do whatever it took to protect them. By no means did she want Ichigo to join the Scouting Legion, but she knew that she wouldn't be able to convince him to not go through with it. He was far too stubborn. Akira, however, wasn't going to give up without a fight. "It wasn't Titans that took our mother away," she reminded him. "There is always the chance that someone could hurt us again, but at least we can be together and protect each other." "This isn't the same." Ichigo rebutted quickly. "You have been trained by me and Enka over the last few years to be able to protect yourselves against other people. Titans are far more powerful and much harder to fight against. I believe in both of your abilities to protect yourself should more men like those come after you again." Akira shook her head fiercely and she launched herself out of her chair into her startled brother's arms. A sad smile formed on Ichigo's face as he felt her tears soak his shirt and he rubbed her back comfortingly. A few moments later, Ichigo was surprised when he felt Tsukiko lift his arm up and she ducked under it, joining the hug. The family of three stayed huddled up for a good 10 minutes before Ichigo broke it. In those 10 minutes, Akira tried every argument that she could think of to convince Ichigo to join the garrisons, but the rebutted them all. He needed to join the Scouting Legion. Once Akira and Tsukiko were back in their seats, Ichigo looked into Tsukiko's downcast eyes and Akira's red eyes from all of her crying and he gave them a confident, reassuring grin. "Don't worry, I'm not going to die anytime soon," Ichigo promised them. The rest of breakfast was a subdued affair and Ichigo eventually had to leave. He had been assigned to wall duty on Wall Rose. The thought that he didn't have to work until he picked the military force he wanted to join had entered his mind briefly, but that dream was quickly shattered when he received his orders after the graduation ceremony. Eren, Armin and Mikasa also had duties to attend to. When Ichigo left the house and felt the warm sunlight hit his face, it managed to cheer him up slightly, judging by the small smile that appeared on his face. He had always loved a nice, warm, sunny day. He glanced back at the house, his smile fell away immediately, and he felt guilty for having to leave after such an emotional talk. It had been over a year since he had felt this rotten after a big talk, but fortunately, in the end, things worked out and it actually helped strengthen Mikasa and his bond. He couldn't help but think back to what happened back then. He could still remember the lead up to the event, what happened, the fallout and the reconciliation as if it only happened recently. Flashback, 749, Trost District. 14-year-old, Ichigo grunted as Mikasa placed another wooden crate on top of the one that he was already holding and he carried it over towards the wagon. It was filled with cans of food and tanks of fuel for the 3 DMG that were to be sent out to the Scouting Legion. When he reached the wagon, Eren was already there preparing to take a crate off of it. The crates on the wagon were filled with empty fuel tanks that needed to be refilled. He looked surprised that Ichigo was able to carry 2 heavy crates at once and he was even further shocked that Mikasa was able to carry 3. He was struggling to carry one filled with empty tanks. Once Mikasa placed the crates on the wagon, she attempted to assist Eren by taking his crate, but Eren harshly pushed her away. "Hey, leave it!" Eren snapped at her, but she ignored him and attempted to take it once again, but she was shoved away. "Leave it!" Ichigo sighed at the two of them, ignoring the uncomfortable in his chest at their interaction. He didn't understand what he had felt towards Mikasa over the last year, but he knew that something had changed because she was more than just a friend to him now. "Excuse me." A soft voice interrupted them and they turned to see a middle-aged woman carrying a basket staring at them hesitantly. "Do you know if Jean Kirstein is around?" "Yeah, he is inside the cafeteria." Ichigo answered her, and he pointed to the door that would lead her there. "Thank you." The woman said gratefully and she headed inside. The fight was forgotten as Mikasa and Eren shared a curious glance with each other, causing Ichigo to sigh. "You guys go ahead," he assured them. "I can finish up here." Eren quickly followed the woman into the cafeteria and Mikasa followed him but not before giving Ichigo an "Are you sure?" look that Ichigo easily deciphered and he responded with a quick nod. Mikasa smiled at him before going after Eren. "You're really into her, aren't you?" Ichigo spun around to see Marco leaning against the edge of the wagon, a sad, understanding smile on his freckled face. "What are you talking about?" Ichigo narrowed his eyes at him. Marco shook his head and he walked over to the orange-haired cadet. "Let me give you a hand." Ichigo was grateful for the help but he still wasn't going to let Marco off the hook. "What do you mean I'm into her?" "She's my friend." Marco chuckled lightly, lifting a crate off the wagon. "That doesn't matter. Friends can fall for each other. Although it must be hard for you considering how close Eren and Mikasa are. They say that they are family but none of us have been able to truly figure out if that is all they truly feel for each other." Ichigo couldn't argue with that. When they were younger it was easy to accept at how close they were, but as they grew older, Ichigo couldn't deny that he felt jealous that they seemed much too close to be brother and sister. The only thing that helped Ichigo control his jealousy to conceal it from Mikasa and Eren was that Eren was so driven to kill all the titans that he may not pay attention to those kinds of feelings. The orange-haired cadet wouldn't admit that he was jealous out loud though. Eren's only interested in getting stronger to fight the titans. He doesn't strike me as the type that is interested in having a girlfriend, but if Eren and Mikasa do get together, then I will be happy for them. Ichigo informed him firmly. Marco looked at him surprised. "You're sure?" "Yes." Ichigo snapped at him, picking up a crate off the wagon. "Huh?" Marco muttered with wide eyes. "I guess I was mistaken about you." Ichigo turned his back and smirked, glad that he had been able to get off this topic. Unfortunately for him, Marco had a sudden realization and a teasing grin formed on his face. "I see, if you don't have feelings for Mikasa, then it's Annie that you like." Ichigo's eyes widened at the declaration and he almost dropped the crate in shock, but he just managed to keep hold of it. If he hadn't, he probably would have broken at least a toe. "Annie?" Ichigo spluttered in shock. "Where the hell did that come from?" Marco placed a crate onto the wagon. "Apart from Mikasa, Annie is the only other girl that you really interact with. You two spar together all the time." Ichigo grunted, lowering the crate onto the ground. "She just wants to get stronger and so I am helping her. Plus she has some interesting fighting moves that I have picked up. That's all." Ichigo said strongly. Marco didn't seem to buy it, though. "It's nothing to be embarrassed about," he assured the orange-haired cadet. "I know that we are here to train to join the military and fight the titans, but it's understandable that we get distracted by the opposite section. Pretty much every guy in the squad is interested in someone. Jean has made it obvious that he is interested in Mikasa." Marco grinned at the disgruntled look on Ichigo's face, despite her lack of interest in him. "Connie has a crush on Sasha, Thomas on Mina. Don't get me started on Reiner's feelings for Krista, but I guess you can't blame him." Marco chuckled awkwardly, a light blush on his face. "I'm also pretty sure that Bertolt likes Annie." "Enough." Ichigo snapped, thoroughly annoyed. first of all, how do you know all this? Second of all, I'm not interested in either Mikasa or Annie. I'm not interested in anyone as a matter of fact. Shirasaki scoffed in his head, that's the biggest lie you've ever said. You have a thing for them both. Ichigo's inner self fell silent for a moment, before mock sniffing, my boy is into two girls. I'm so proud. Shut up. Ichigo was starting to get incredibly frustrating with this discussion, especially since he knew that they were right. It was a topic that he hated talking about, especially with Shirasaki, since he was really the only one he could talk to about it. He was ashamed for feeling this way about them. Mikasa had been his friend for a long time and he couldn't believe that he was thinking of her in a SXL way. It was slightly different with Annie. Ichigo didn't know much about her past, except for the fact that her father was the one that taught her to fight and that she seemed to both love and resent her father. The interaction that they really only had was their constant sparring matches, and Ichigo couldn't deny that he was attracted to her. Ichigo realized that Annie and Mikasa were actually a lot alike, more than either of them wanted to admit. Like Mikasa, Ichigo never acted on his attraction with Annie. He didn't know how Mikasa felt about him and how she really felt about Eren, and that stopped him from even thinking about acting on his feelings. With Annie, it was different. He knew that it was a one-sided attraction on his part, and he discovered this during one of their sparring sessions. In order to counter one of her attacks, he accidentally grasped one of her butt cheeks and flipped her over him. He hadn't realized it at the time until after he had thrown her. Annie hadn't appreciated this and hadn't talked to him for 2 weeks. Whenever she had been forced into a position to talk to him when they were alone, all she did was call him a pervert. I hang around them all, of course. Marco interrupted his thoughts, answering his previous question. I notice the signs, and of course whenever they get drunk, they tend to spill their secrets. Drunk? Reiner and Bertolt? Ichigo skeptically questioned him. Despite them being older than him and most of the other cadets, he had never seen them drunk. Sure, they drank alcohol, but they didn't drink enough to become intoxicated. No, they are mostly guesses. Marco chuckled lightly. Everyone else revealed their crushes when drunk, except Jean. He isn't exactly subtle about his crush on Mikasa. Ichigo shook his head, and he hurriedly began stacking crates onto the wagon. He had enough of this conversation. Flashback, later that night. Ichigo was bored, very bored. Eren was off hanging with Bertolt, no doubt trying to learn something new about the military training. Bertolt and Reiner were among the best soldiers in the squad, so it made sense for Eren to go to one of them. Denryu was nowhere in sight, not that Ichigo particularly cared. Reiner, Connie, Armin, Sasha, Jean and Annie were off doing this crazy cooking match, but he had no interest in checking it out. He was quite surprised that Annie was participating in something like that. Fortunately for him, there was one person that was free tonight, and that Mikasa. When he first went to her room to find it empty, he immediately knew where she would be, and so he immediately went to the training rooms. He came across a locked door and he knocked on it. Mikasa, you in here? The orange-haired cadet called out. Ichigo heard the sound of the door unlocking before it was swung open, and the sight took Ichigo's breath away. There stood Mikasa in nothing more than a pair of purple shorts, fingerless gloves, and most noticeably, wearing a white sports br. He was able to get a clear picture at her lean yet muscular body and her abs, which may put off some men, but Ichigo thought that they suited her perfectly. Doing some training, are you? Squeaked Ichigo, a blush of embarrassment forming on his face at the sound of his own voice. Shirasaki snickered in his head. Mikasa gave him a curious tilt of her head, having never heard Ichigo say something in such a squeaky voice. She couldn't deny that she found it amusing. Yeah, Mikasa smiled slightly. Want to spar? Ichigo didn't trust himself to speak, in case that DMN voice came out again, and he nodded. He had nothing better to do. When Mikasa turned around, allowing him to come him, Ichigo's eyes shamefully fell to her backside. She is smoking. Shirasaki whistled. Ichigo tore his eyes away from Mikasa. "Shut up," he snapped at Shirasaki. He already knew that, and he didn't need him commenting on it. He wiped some sweat that had suddenly appeared on his forehead and he suddenly realized that the room was quite warm. That didn't surprise. Mikasa was willingly to do anything to get strong, and one of the ways was to make the room warmer to increase the difficulty of her training. Deciding to make things a little easier, he took off his jacket and shirt, leaving him in only his brown pants. One of the problems with the uniform was that it was heavy and hot, and under these conditions, it wouldn't be idle to wear it. In the process of removing his shirt, he didn't see Mikasa's eyes wandering his upper body with interest, and the light blush that appeared on her face. "Okay," Ichigo smirked, raising his arms up in a defensive stance, "show me what you've got." Mikasa shot towards him, throwing a punch to his face, but it was evaded, and Ichigo followed up by ducking under her right hook. Mikasa brought her knee up towards his knee, but Ichigo crossed his arms under his chin and blocked the kick. With a quick maneuver, Ichigo grabbed the leg that she tried to kick with and flipped her over him, but Mikasa landed into a handstand before gracefully flipping back onto her feet. Ichigo was forced to block the next barrage of punches and kicks, flinching every her blows made contact with his arms. It continued to amazing at just how much sheer power Mikasa had behind her blows. After deflecting another punch, Ichigo made a fatal mistake. His eyes were drawn to her bouncing melons, freezing him for a moment before Mikasa slipped a punch into his stomach. Ichigo managed to catch Mikasa's wrist when she attempted to continue her attack with a punch to his head, but his footing was off, and along with her momentum caused Ichigo to fall back towards the floor. He pulled a startled Mikasa with him. Ichigo landed on his back with Mikasa lying right on top of him, and they were both breathing heavily. When Ichigo had come looking for a spar, he hadn't planned on it getting that intense, but they both really got into it. Ichigo suddenly realized the position that they were in. He could feel her breath on his lips and her covered melons pressing into his chest. He knew that he should roll her off him and gain some distance, but he didn't do it because he thoroughly enjoyed the feeling of her body lying on top of his. "Ichigo." Mikasa murmured softly, staring intently into his eyes. She was suddenly aware that he wasn't wearing a shirt and she was only in a bra and shorts. However, despite the embarrassment of her position, she couldn't pull away, nor could she break eye contact with him. This was the guy that had saved her life, the guy that pulled her out of the darkness, the guy that she had unshakable faith in. Mikasa couldn't resist and she pressed her lips softly to his. It was a light and hesitant kiss, but it was enough to convey everything that she felt for him. When she pulled away, Ichigo could see the fear in her eyes, scared of his reaction, but she didn't need to be. Ichigo immediately lifted his head up and lightly kissed her back. He had absolutely no idea what he was doing and he relied heavily on his instincts. When he pulled away, Mikasa looked down at him with a light blush on her face and she didn't hesitate to eagerly kiss him again. This time she was no longer hesitant, and this time the kiss was fiercer and more passionate. After a few minutes where they just lay there with Mikasa on top, kissing passionately, Ichigo gained a moment of clarity when their lips broke away. He tried to end this before it went too far and he tried to push her away, but Mikasa ignored his attempt by claiming his lips again in a heated kiss. In that moment, Ichigo gave in to his longing, thrilled that Mikasa seemed to feel the same way, and he experimentally ran his tongue along her bottom lip. Mikasa ran one of her hands through his orange locks and her other hand along his naked torso, loving the feel of his hard chest. The black-haired girl grinned into the kiss when she felt his hardening member on her thigh, and she adjusted her waist so she was sitting directly on his member and she slowly began to grind on it. Not for a moment did she break from the kiss. Ichigo moaned into mouth when he felt her grind him and he slowly caressed the back of her thighs with his hands. His tongue prodded her mouth and to his delight, she opened her mouth to give him better access. Their passion and eagerness easily made up for their inexperience and their tongues danced. When Ichigo's hands cupped her thighs, just under her buttocks, he hesitated, breaking the kiss, and he pulled back to look in her eyes, wanting to know if he had permission to continue. Mikasa whimpered at the loss of his lips on hers, and she answered his unasked question by grabbing one of his hands and placing it on her backside. She moaned lightly at the feeling, and with wide eyes, Ichigo clenched her cheek slightly, amazed at the soft feeling. Considering how muscular she was, Ichigo was surprised at how soft her backside was, and he didn't hesitate to clasp her free cheek with his other hand. As amazing as this felt, he knew he wouldn't last much longer because of how she was grinding on his member, and so he flipped her onto her back, taking control. Mikasa gasped in surprise at the sudden change, and Ichigo's hands moved from her backside to her waist. Then they slowly slid up her stomach, closing in on her melons, and he hesitated when he reached her. Mikasa looked up at him, there was only lust and delight in her eyes, and when she gave him a small smile, Ichigo didn't hesitate. The orange-haired cadet hurriedly pulled off her exercise bra and he threw it to the other side of the room. Mikasa giggled slightly at his eagerness. But her amusement immediately ceased when she noticed Ichigo staring at her intently. His eyes intently looked over her naked torso, in awe of her abs that suited her perfectly, the handful size and perkiness of her melons. He had never seen such a appealing sight in his life. Mikasa blushed after he did nothing but stare at her for a few seconds. "What is it?" she shyly asked him, and she looked away. The usually tough girl was suddenly feeling very insecure about her appearance. Over the past few months, she had overheard boys talking about girls and SEC, and suddenly she was very self-conscious of her abs. It was a feature that she had that guys wouldn't like, and she feared that Ichigo was about to realize how ugly it was. "You're gorgeous," Ichigo whispered sincerely, looking directly into her eyes. "No, gorgeous doesn't cover it. I can't find any words to describe just how amazing you are." In his own mind, Shirasaki rolled his eyes at the cheesy line. However, he kept quiet, not wanting to interrupt the special moment that Ichigo was having. Mikasa knew Ichigo better than anyone, and she was easily able to identify whenever he was being sincere and when he was lying. Her heart felt like it was going to burst out of her chest in happiness when she heard the sincerity in his voice, and she gave him the most passionate kiss she could give him. Mikasa tried to lift her hips in order to grind into his member again, and Ichigo put one hand on her waist to stop her. Her legs wrapped around his waist, and Ichigo drove his hardened member along her covered core. "Ichigo." Mikasa whispered his name longingly, breaking the kiss. Ichigo had never heard her say his name in such a breathless and loving tone before, and all he knew was that he wanted to hear it again and again and again. He had never wanted anything more in his life. He managed to rein himself in though and ceased his thrusting before he released. With his free hand, he cupped her right breast and gently squeezed it, marveling at how firm it was. Mikasa let out an approving mmm, and Ichigo stared at the NPL of the breast in his hands. Unable to resist, he lowered his head and gently nibbled the NPL. Mikasa arched her back, groaning loudly at how nice it felt. Just as Ichigo released his grip on her waist and proceeded to rub her remaining breast with it. Slam slam. The loud knock on the locked door killed the moment entirely, and Ichigo jumped off her, and Mikasa instinctively raised her arms in front of her melons. "Will you hurry up and finish training in there?" a loud voice shouted outside the room. "Some of us want to get some training in tonight." Mikasa hurriedly put her BR and shirt back on, and Ichigo also changed back into the uniform he had been wearing when he came in. It took them under a minute to get fully dressed, and Mikasa opened the door and allowed some older soldiers in to use the training room. Ichigo followed Mikasa out of the room, with his hands in his pockets in an attempt to hide the evidence of his reaction to what he and Mikasa had been really doing in there. Once they were in the clear, Ichigo looked over at Mikasa, and it sunk in just what they had done. What he had done to his friend. Their eyes made contact, but there was no continuing what they had just done. The moment had passed. "I think we need to talk about what just happened," said Ichigo reluctantly. It was like a bucket of cold water had just been dumped on him, and he began to comprehend what they had just done. How would Eren react to what they had just done? Would he be angry like a protective brother, or would he be furious as a jealous guy that had feelings for Mikasa? Would his friendship with Eren be over? Armin was Eren's friend first, what would he say about this? Mikasa nodded, like Ichigo, she was unable to believe what just happened. Do we just ignore this? She asked him, wonderingly. They were here to train and fight the Titans, not to fall in love. Eren needed her to be as strong as possible in order to protect him, even though he didn't wish it. Mikasa had made a promise to Carla that she would protect Eren no matter what, and she couldn't allow herself to be distracted like this. No matter how much she may want it. We could, Ichigo conceded, or we could just get this out in the open and go from there. Mikasa remained silent, and Ichigo understood that he would have to make the first move. I'm not going to deny that I have feelings for that go beyond friendship, Ichigo informed, blushing slightly in embarrassment. It didn't help that Shirasaki was laughing at him internally. However, you also have feelings for Annie, a blunt Mikasa interrupted him, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Ichigo's eyes widened briefly. I was going to say that getting strong enough to protect my sisters was my main priority, he admitted softly, not anticipating Mikasa's astute interruption. Ichigo could look anyone in the eye and be able to lie to them, everyone but one, and it was the girl standing before him. I am attracted to her, somewhat. Ichigo reluctantly admitted. Mikasa looked away, a scowl instinctively formed on her face at the thought of Ichigo liking Annie. What about you? Ichigo needed to know, do you have feelings for me? Mikasa didn't answer for a moment. I wouldn't have done that with you if I didn't, but... You also have those feelings for Eren, too. Ichigo assumed, with a heavy sigh. Mikasa couldn't meet his eyes, a sign that Ichigo took to say that he was right. Now things are going to get all complicated and awkward. Ichigo complained loudly, perhaps we should take some time apart. The orange-haired cadet pondered, maybe then we can move on from this. Yeah, Mikasa muttered softly in agreement, sadness lacing her voice. Considering that they had been together for so long, it might be best to get some separation for the time being, but she knew that it wasn't going to be easy. She could already admit that her feelings towards Ichigo were stronger than the ones she had for Eren, in a romantic and physical sense, but at the very least, Eren was her family and she had promised Carla that she would protect him, no matter what. How could she possibly put her own desires in front of the wishes and promise of her adopted mother? Man, we are pathetic. Ichigo chuckled, worried about our feelings when the human race could be wiped out at any moment. Mikasa smiled in agreement. It would be the last thing that he said to her for a month, outside of training. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Disco Stu09 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.